And that the holy people, when they left, they said, when we return, we will come from that direction. When stories are told by our people, the Dannette, there are two storylines. One of them is the spiritual creation, which talks about coming into existence in the first world, and then second world, and then here in the third world, and in the future being the fourth world. That's one storyline. The other storyline is the actual physical arrival of our people from the direction east. Now, the original stories in that are told by the old people is the oral history, which is not mentioned very often by people, and of course there are some people in that ignore that entirely. But the information that is contained in the oral history is very important, because it is that sometimes they run together, the spiritual creation and the physical arrival of the Dannette in the Colorado Plateau. The original story is that our people were brought to this place by the holy people from the east, and that the holy people, when they left, they said, when we return, we will come from that direction. So the east becomes the most important direction. So all of our dwellings and our structures and that are always open to the east. That's the first and the most sacred direction. So it is that the Dannette came from the east. And when they came from the east, they talk about the crossings of the wide waters, the flowing water. And the only waters that is wide and flowing could be the Missouri River or the Mississippi River. And the travel coming across the Great Plains, they talk about the which means the wide white lands. And if you've ever been out in the central part of the United States, especially through Kansas, you see flat lands for miles and miles. And as you go along traveling that flat lands, all of a sudden you come to a hole, which is the ravines and that are there on those flat plains. And it's like dropping down 300 or 400 feet, and then at the bottom there are natural springs and groves of trees, and the ravines might run for 3 or 4 miles. And among the trees and all of that are wildlife and all kinds of creatures and birds. And so it was that our people would live there in those ravines, and those locations would be like living underground or below ground. And then when they would finally move on, they would come out of that ground, out of the hole, and then come to the surface and then continue their journey. So the stories run together, like coming out of the below ground and coming up to the surface. And as they came west, one of the first mountains they encounter is in southern Colorado, which is Mount Blanco. That's the first sacred mountain. And they encounter the Rio Grande, and this is long before it was identified as the Rio Grande. But they saw that river, and they planted their fields along that river. And Navajo fields, or the Dannette fields, were spirals. And they planted corn, squash, melon, beans, and cotton, all these different things that they would plant and harvest. And as they looked at the river and the fields from a high elevation, it looked like a necklace. And so that's what the river became known as, the Necklace River, or Yoto, is what we call the Rio Grande as it flows down into the Gulf of Mexico. And then the stories are that they came through the mountains as well, following the flowing Colorado River, which was not known as the Colorado River back then. There are several names that are given to that river, and it comes out of the mountains near what is present-day Grand Junction, Colorado. all of those areas, they have names. It's north of Zilishla, or the Five Mountains, which is the LaSalle Mountains today. And then you have the Tapana'a, which is the Gray Ridge that goes from there at Grand Junction, and it goes all the way to the Green River, and then it kind of fizzles out over to Castledale. And then just over the mountain there is a place called the Fremont Cultural Center. Or all of that area is Dannette. All of the rock art you see at the Fremont Cultural Center, that's all Dannette. All of the ceremonial songs and prayers and ceremonial structures and that is depicted on many of those petroglyphs or rock art. The Dannette talk about coming into the area, and that Tapana'a is known today as the Rook Cliffs, and the coming south, and then eventually they end up in what is now known as the Hovenweep. All of that is the Dannette. And so those are the stories of the physical arrival of the Dannette. There are other stories in that we are more familiar with, and that's Hajine, which is the spiritual creation and the spiritual journey of our people. That's what we are told. All this happened around 300 and 400 AD when they arrived in this particular part of the continent.